Hey, what's going on, y'all? Austin Hardy here, aka Dr. Weldz, and today we're going to be doing an episode on what I'm calling the W Bracelet. It's going to be a little bit more complicated compared to the 4 parts that you've seen prior. If you haven't seen those 4-part series on how to make a welder's bracelet, I really recommend you go checking them out. We'll wait here for you. But for everyone else, let's get started. So the first step is, obviously, we've got to kind of select our material for this project. And again, we're going to be kind of braiding this TIG wire. And we need something to kind of wrap it around. So that's kind of the first things we're going to be looking at. Today, we're going to be working with one small piece. It's about 7 inches long of some 308 stainless steel. Okay, this is 5/32 inches in diameter. And it's going to be our core, if you will. Now, the pieces that we're going to need to wrap are going to be these 4 pieces of 16th inch diameter, 316 stainless steel. Okay. Instead of how these are kind of formed, or it's usually just twisting the wire, putting them side by side, tacking them along the back side, and then once all the sections are tacked together, we bend them. This is going to be different. We're not going to do any tacks on the back side because this is all going to be braided by hand. It's going to be difficult. This is the stamped version of wire that you can buy from manufacturers. So I cut all the stamps off, but I do like the stamped wire better than the printed wire because it does seem to be a little bit more malleable, a little bit more bendy. But the first step that we got to do after we've selected the wire, cut the stamps off, cut the length 7 inches here. This isn't going to be the official length of it. This is just long enough to use every bit of this wire to wrap around. We've got to connect all of these. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take 2 wires and 2 wires on either side of the 5/32, the big wire. We're going to put them all side by side, 2 and 2 on each side. And then we're going to tack weld this pretty good. Okay, so as far as machine settings, I'm going to run about 50 amps because I am just worried about melting only the sides. Post flow is at 10. I don't really mind any pre-flow. Start and end amperage, 10 and 20. That just kind of helps ease things in. I've got my pedal control on, so I'm going to have full control over my arc. So in case I need more beans, I can give it all the beans or I can give it less than 50, you know. We're going to run high frequency so that we can not have to touch the work as we're getting started. Using the Everlast Lightning 275. That's what I like to use here in my home shop is the mean green machines. So we're going to do our best to try to keep everything together. You can try to clamp it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we do need two on either side of this. And once we can hold it here, we'll take the TIG torch and we're just going to simply fuse all this together. So now we got 2 wires on each side with the 5/32 wire in the middle. And then we have the 1/16, 4 1/16 wires along either side. Now we're going to put it in our vise here, and then we can start braiding it. All right, so I'm going to try to video this as best as I can. We've got each of our wires here, again, tacked to one end of the 5/32 wire. Okay, so we have 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. I normally work on it from this side, but to help visualize for the camera and stuff, I have to stand on the back side of this vise. But I'm going to take this wire from the top, okay, and what I'm going to do is simply just bring it around the top here and really apply some pressure. We want to make sure that it's wrapped as tight as possible. Okay, and where it was back here, now we're going to keep it. This one's going to be on the back side, and this one's going to be on the front. Okay, now that we did this side, we can move to this side. We'll take the wire that's on the top or closest to me at this point, and I'm going to bring it around right in front of that one, that last one. And this is tough. This takes some finger strength and some
some serious pulling and twisting, so a pair of gloves is sometimes nice. So again, this one was where this one is now. And now I could go back to this one. And then we're going to keep doing this method here. Bringing it around the top. Applying some pressure. Making sure that it stays tight. Okay. And now that one's at the front, whereas it was in the back. So back to this one. Bring it around the top. Apply some pressure. And bring it around. Now, I like to take a pair of pliers and a hammer. Kind of set this there and give this some taps on either side. This is to help keep bunch everything up. Now, that's something that you're going to want to do pretty regularly, is take that and give it some taps as you're braiding this along. And you have to pay attention on which side you just finished before you do the next one. So again, you're always bringing this guy, either depending on which way you're looking at it, but you're going to bring him across the top and to the front of the side that it was just on. So the wire that you're going to be working with always stays on the same side. It just alternates front and back. Same thing with this side. So we just did this one, right? We brought this guy from here, from the back, across the top and under. So now we need to come to this guy and do the same again for him. And we will repeat this process so many times. And again, you want to make sure that you're butted up across the top of that wire as tight as you can. And if you can't get it tight, you need to take the pliers and the hammer and make sure that it gets squished down in there. Now we'll continue up this shaft doing this braiding process, and we'll continue up all the way up until we get enough, and then we'll start pinching it in the vise so that it squeezes this way too, because not only do we want to keep the braid really compact, but we want to squeeze the sides of it as well. So as you can see, we're working our way down. We want to keep this nice and tight, and that's from the hammering on the ends, pushing them in. And then about every half an inch or so, once I make it about a half an inch out, I put it further back in the vise and make sure it's squeezed nice and tight. My vise is real crummy, but it'll do the job. We're trying to make sure that these all stay even. And that's what's going to be pretty crucial as far as making this thing look good. We got it all braided out. It's got some little bit of inconsistencies in it, but we made it to the end. I went ahead and cut the end pieces off that were a little extra. And I've got this, super tight in my vise because I want this end to be held together real tight. And then I'm going to take my grinder here and I'm just going to cut about where everything starts to be even. It starts to get a little flayed out here at the end. I'm going to cut it really close to this vise where everything's nice and tight. And then while it's holding everything, I'm going to end up welding everything in place. So first, we're going to grind the ugly off the end. And we'll end up doing that to this other end as well. Right, that's all together. That's all together. Not too bad. I got a little twist in it where I'm not as even all the way around. That's where I'm going to come in with the hammer. Kind of give things a little bit of love here and there where I think they need. Got the band here. Got a mostly straight, mostly consistent. Now I haven't taken any heat to this. I just kind of squeezed it in the vise. I'm going to take these twisted wires here that I've twisted, one forward, one reverse. They're 3/32 309 stainless steel. And then I'm going to weld each of these to the side of this here band just to give it some pizzazz, right? So if you haven't already figured out how to twist wire, go to part 1 of my 4-part series on how to twist wire and what wire is best, and then what all you can do with this twisted wire. And then as far as welding this to the backside, check out part 2. So we've got the bracelet welded together. It's braided through the center and then tack welded to the sides of these braided wires. It's still a little toasty. Now we're going to go about kind of flattening it. You know, all these wires aren't exactly even and flat. And then, you know, kind of the same with this orientation here. So now I'm going to get things hot, bring out the old manipulator. So now that we've hammered this flatter and we've kind of closed the gaps in between each kind of wire and everything, I think hammering really helps do that. Now we're going to take this sucker over to the piece of pipe. We're going to wrap it around and shape it, bend it to the shape of a wrist. So now we got that sucker bent, kind of wrapped around a little bit better. Got a really cool pattern. Pretty nice. Now we're going to add some pizzazz to it. Now when I say I'm going to add some pizzazz, I'm going to do stuff that I've never done. I'm going to actually add a letter to it. I'm going to add the letter W for weld. And then I'm going to try to do something fancier for the ends. Normally I would just fill it in on the ends with a bunch of filler metal and kind of sand that down, which is still maybe an option, but I'm going to try to do some end caps. So I have decided to go ahead and do a little bit of polishing on here. I'm not going to bring it to the extra shiny stage, and I got to be careful while I'm working on it in the future so I don't scratch anything. But I'm going to go ahead and take my die grinder here with 60 grit, then we'll move to 80 grit, then probably 120 before I go ahead and call it a little bit of a day for the sanding and move on to the end caps and the W. Once those are on there, I'll feel a little bit more confident about getting those to about the same level of grit, and then as well as being able to polish everything evenly. Let's get to it. This bracelet's going to get hot, so put some gloves on, put some double eye protection on. We're going to send some dust and some bits everywhere. We want to be very careful as we're grinding. These wires are thin, so you can grind them through. Now, if you have a hammer mark or a little issue, especially if you move on while you're trying to sand it and that shaft hits the stainless, you're going to leave a dent. You can grind into that a little bit, but you want to avoid grinding too much. Otherwise, you have one of these wires snap. Oh, what a mess. God, I don't care for that polishing. Anyway, we made it through 3 grits, 60, 80, and 120. Make sure you're always orientating the bracelet as a backward C. If you end up facing it this way, it's kind of counterproductive for the grinder. It's going to grab that. It's going to try to throw it out your vise or bend it. So make sure you're following the steps on step 4 of the 4-part series as far as polishing it. Now I've got this close enough to where I feel like I can make the other modifications and still be able to get a good polish on afterwards. Moving on to these end caps, I was able to successfully do one. What I'm doing is I'm actually taking some of this copper sheet metal here. I've just kind of cut a length out of it, certain width, a little strip out of a section of sheet metal, and I just wrapped it around the end of the bracelet and then closed the end, kind of eyeballed the measurement, cut it to length, then squeezed it back on. Once I've squeezed it back on, the copper wrapped around, I hold it in my vise, and then I'll try to do the back seam here. I'll back weld that with some silicon bronze. Silicon bronze is really nice to tack this copper to stainless and let everything fuse together properly. Okay, so I've got it in my vise. I've cut the little piece of copper to the width and the length. You can see that it's got a gap in there. I learned it from doing this one that if it didn't have a gap and I squeezed it, I ended up getting a lot of gap on those sides. So I don't mind there being a little gap in between here, because even if I do weld this copper to the stainless, I'm going to have a weld there with the silicon bronze that I can grind down, and you won't see the seam. And then we'll take this end and we'll fill it in with silicon bronze as well. All right, got my TIG torch ready. Got a little dirty tungsten, but it's all right. I'm not worried about it. We're doing we're not really going for accuracy here anyway. We're going to smack it right there with our tungsten. And then I've got this 16th inch sized silicon bronze. I want to kind of use it as a sacrificial metal and have it in between my arc and my plate. The stainless is going to melt faster than this copper, but once this copper gets hot, it's going to take off. So I got to be ready for it for when that happens. Now, when doing that little bit of weld, you've got to be careful, because once that copper gets hot, it's going to take off. It just sinks right in. The silicon bronze soaks in right into the copper,
but the stainless wanted to melt first, and then eventually the copper wanted to melt too quickly. So you really have to kind of flutter your amperage while you're doing that. We've got the long seam, is what we'll call it, done. Now we can do the end cap. So you want to be really careful when doing this next part, because that's where we're going to put most of the heat into it, and it is just sheet metal. So once it gets up to that really critical temperature, it's just going to fizzle, and then you'll just see it droop at first if you don't catch it, and then after that droop, it's just going to right on the floor. So be careful when welding this copper to stainless.
All right, same concept here. We're going to take this filler metal and hold it in between the crack and the stainless, where it's going to ball up, and I'm going to wait for that ball to get so hot that it sticks to the stainless and then soaks into the copper. Once this copper starts to warm up, it's going to be really easy to get this wire to fuse into it, and then eventually it's going to get too hot and it's going to fall out. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work and then stop, let it cool. You can actually quench copper and it won't actually harden it. It'll actually bring it back to its original properties, believe it or not. All right, so now you can see we've put a bit of weld of silicon bronze from this side, kind of wrapped this corner over and made it across. You really want to flutter your foot pedal there so that you can sink the heat in and come back off of it. You saw me doing a bunch of tungsten sticking over here. I was at a weird angle. This up here, the other part of the bracelet was in the way. Now I'm going to turn this around so that I can get a better view of the opposite side here, and we can finish the welding that needs to get done. The end caps are looking good. Started grinding a little too thin there, so that's a little worrisome. Got to be careful on these end caps. I think I should have maybe made them used a little bit thicker sheet metal than what I used that time. I think I used some 18 gauge, a little thinner. Maybe some 16 or 14 gauge would have been better. But the band's looking good. It's looking even, it's shiny. Okay, now we're going to do the final modification where we're going to put a W, the letter W for weld, right in the center here. Just got done tacking this together, nothing fancy, didn't feel like I needed to show that. 2 pieces of wire side by side, tacked together about every 1/4 of an inch or so. We're going to take this, that'll be the back side, this will be the front. We're going to cut this into 4 different pieces. So I ended up using the grinder. I didn't feel like filming it. Again, we're just taking that piece of wire and we're chopping it up. And this is how I'm going to kind of lay out my W. I'm just doing 90-degree turns. We're going to tack this first and get this tacked together on the back side. So we've got the W tacked together. I've cooled it off in some water. Now we've got all, of course, you can see on the back side, I've got it pretty much welded across right through here. That's going to be our W. Now this is going to look better once we get some polish on it. We might do a little bit of tweaking as far as squishing it. We also got to add a little bit of a curl in it, a radius, to see how it's going to do about fitting on here. And now I'm going to cut that beautiful section out and throw it away. Ah! Check it out. We just got to now splice that W in. It's going to drop a little bit, be more centered, but I think that's pretty freaking sick. Of course, we got to polish it. We got to do a little bit more. We're going to get it tacked on first, and then we'll have this W bracelet just about done. And just like that, without warning, it's all welded up. Sorry I didn't get around to showing that, but again, this is all kind of stuff that I've given tips on in those other videos, is the 4-part series of how to weld it. We've almost got to the complete polished part. So that's what's next, is we're going to run it over the bench grinder and put that extra bit of shiny on it. And this W bracelet will be done. Well, that's it, guys, for this episode on Weld.com about how to make the W bracelet. Got copper end caps and all with a nice fat letter on it, braided wire, not twisted. If you have any questions on how to make a bracelet, again, refer back to those 4-part series on how to twist, how to weld, how to bend, and how to polish those bracelets. That way you get a better idea on how we accomplished it here today. So if you like what you saw today, feel free to like, subscribe, and follow on all of our channels. Don't forget to tell your friends all about the Weld app. Follow me, aka Dr. Weldz. Stick around. Might teach you something.